liberal country like colonies, you've said, the French Revolution, after the French Revolution in the late 1700s, and the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, what were the Napoleonic Wars other than and complete expansion?
Yeah.
But that's against the liberal principle. You could argue, well, hold on, this was before J.S. Mill and the harm principle, but it was after John Locke. It was after Thomas Hobbes. It was after a lot of the philosophers already. Montesquieu, who was himself writing in a language these people could understand. So all of these individuals, Tocqueville, it was after these individuals. I'm not sure if Tocqueville, I'm not seeing if it was after them or not. But it was after these. So the idea is liberalism was enshrined, and the idea of the French Revolution was premised on a philosophical liberalism. In many ways, right? So the point I'm making to you is, we should be looking at countries and peoples that claim to be philosophically liberal, and then saying, well, hold on, what are you doing here? What's this conquest? What happened to the natives?
So that's one of the things, is that your actions, the actions of people that describe themselves as liberal, or not, maybe not their actions, but the actions of their government. But one of the things is, if you're looking at Islam and saying Islam is expansionist, so Islam is to Muslims as my government is to me, based on the country that I'm in. So there's a link between the two. So if I turn around and say, well, I'm against Islam being expansionist, however, my government, for example, Tony Blair lives around the corner, going into the Middle East and
absolutely,
indirectly or directly resulting to the death of a million people.
And let me tell you something.
Is that congruent with my view against Islam infringing on British culture?
I think what you've said there is very powerful. What you said there is good, and I like it. And there's another layer of things I want to put to you. Number one, I agree with the fact. There's two things you need to know. Number one, I agree with the fact that Islam, they had this called al-khiyar al-thulathi, the three choices that you have, the jizya, this and that. And we're not saying that that doesn't exist or that should be deleted from the Quran. We believe that it's actually applicable in many of the empire type situations where you have different empires and all these things. It could be applicable, but here's the thing, and this is an important point once again, the ultra right and people, academics like Jordan Peterson, Sargon and others, they don't appreciate. Islam civilizationally, I'm not talking about the religion, but also the jurisprudence, usuli, the Islam that you can understand from the usul, which are the principles of jurisprudence, both can have the propensity, they both have the propensity not to be expansionist in times. Let me tell you what I mean. Once again, people will object. I know even some Muslims will object to me using the word expansionism. But I'm trying to be honest and say, look, on an international relations level, this the whole three options would be seen as a kind of expansionism. Historically, if we're doing academic work, we couldn't lie about that or try and sugarcoat that. It would be seen by the liberal eye as being.
You can just interpret it. You can interpret it in a way that Islam is a set of rules, it's a set of guidelines, and in the West we have this agenda of expansionism of what we call quote unquote democracy. And if you look at the way in which democracy has been forced upon Africa, so Africa was big country. You've got the Mali Empire. Colonialism, they come in, post-colonialism, they break everything down and they draw lines across, tribes that are strewn across the whole country, and they implement democracy, which is expansionist because it's a Western societal, development. You put it on a group of individuals and it doesn't work. So when people talk about the expansion of Islam, why don't they talk about the failed expansion of democracy in the US, in the Middle East, and European?
Some do, and to be fair, some do and some don't, right? But those individuals, I've not heard them speak about it. Not that they haven't, I just haven't heard them. They don't. Right, so
because it's like an inconvenient truth,
Another point which is really, really important. When I was saying it has the propensity not to be, like for example, in Surah Al-Nisa, chapter 4 of the Quran, it says, إلا الذين بينكم وبينهم ميثاق أو جاءوكم حصرت صدورهم. Except for, it's talking about who you're not meant to harm, etc. Except for the ones you have a peace treaty with, and they come to you, حصرت صدورهم. They don't come in to fight you, right? So the point here is, if Islam, I'm talking here civilization, because once again we don't want to equivocate. If Islam civilizationally thought, or let's say leaders of Islam, leaders of Muslim countries, because right now they're not really ruling by Islam, let's be fair, yeah? But a lot of the countries, or most of them, if not all of them,
because they're run by potent,
yeah, so, but the point is this.
Western implemented people.
Right, so what I was going to say is, if the conditions were right, and it was seen that there was no aggressive behavior, and a treaty of 10 years or indefinitely, or whatever it may be, would be in the interest of the inhabitants, the Muslim inhabitants, and the non-Muslim inhabitants if they happen to inhabit, say for example, a Muslim-run country, with Islamic law, etc. I'm thinking theoretically here, yeah? If that was the case, that could be put in place, as per the current narrative. But generally, the whole three choices thing, three options, that's in place as well.
Yeah.
So if, for example, an Islamic government saw the other empires, just like I did this, Persian Empire, the Roman, these have the potential to absorb us into it.
Yeah.
They said, look, actually, let's preempt this.
Yeah.
Why waste time? Why wait for them to come and fight us? Let's go and fight them first.
Yeah.
Really? If I was going to go to a place and I knew some hostile people were going to attack me,
probably wouldn't go there.
yeah, me, I'm a bit silly. I do
You
go
probably
there.
would.
Anyways,
Antagonistic.
yeah, no, I'm probably a foolish person. But, you know, maybe you think, okay, well, if they're going to attack me, let me hit them first.
Yeah.
So it depends on the situation. And that's why we started off this discussion by saying when people analyze Islam, they don't understand that it's actually a political system as well. It is.
Yeah, of course.
A lot of people don't understand that.
Sharia law and all your...
Yes, it's a political system as well. It gives us, look, there's a book called The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Yeah? Is it a controversial book? Be honest, in your eyes, is it a controversial book?
Not particularly, no.
Not particularly.
It's
Do you know?
quite a revered business book as well.
Absolutely.
People will use it and, you know, you have it on the bookshelf and
You're
office in the
absolutely
city
right.
or anything.
And why do you think they do that?
Because, we're all playing a game and, games require strategies and guidelines.
Perfect.
So
The book is short.
Yeah.
The book is short. It's not a small book. You can read it. Sun Tzu's The Art of War gives generals and commanders, whatever it may be, guidance on how, just general principles, how to kind of subdue the enemy, how to fight in different terrain and these things, right? It's not a controversial book because the whole purpose of the book is that it gives people guidance on how to fight war. But as you said, it's also applicable to people in business and daily lives because actually a lot of those principles can be employed by us. The Quran has advice to generals. And I'll tell you something. How do we know if the advice of a book is effective or not? We look at the implementation. Now, no one's going to disagree. It's impossible to disagree that the expansion of Islam, because you can't have your cake and eat it both. You can't say the expansion of Islam, the military expansion of Islam, was unsuccessful. If it was successful, then the advice must have been good advice. And if it was good advice, then it's fulfilled its purpose. The Quran gives people advice on how to act in a state of war, how to fight the people. وَإِذَا لَقِيتُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا فَضَرْبُ الرِّقَابِ. If you see the people, then strike their necks. In Surah Al-Anfal it says, مِن كُلِّ بَنَانٍ, cut their fingertips. So cut their necks and cut their Why? Because if you don't have fingertips, you can't hold a sword. Now, if you wanted to be clever, you say, okay, well, hold on. If you can't hold, it's logical understanding, yeah? You can't hold the sword. Now you can say, okay, well, to take a principle from that, anything which means that you're holding weaponry or something like that, if you destroy that, you're destroying their abilities to be able to fight back. It says in the Quran.
Which you're disarming somebody, aren't you?
Yeah, it says, أعد لهم ما استطعتم من قوة ومن رباط الخيل ترهبون به عدو الله وعدوكم وآخرون من دورهم لا تعلمونهم الله يعلمهم. In Surah Al-Anfal, in chapter 8 of the Quran, it says, and prepare for them, horses, من قوة, from strength, ورباط الخيل, from the horses that you're going to get for them. So you can scare your enemy with them. You're trying to penetrate them, you're trying to petrify them, you're trying to scare them. Absolutely, that's what I'm. No, you know what I'm saying?
That's why you're wearing sleeveless.
No, I had something to do, like some exercise today, and I just came. I was quite hot today. It's a hot day.
You can wear what you want.
the Prophet Muhammad on this before I get refuted. You know Hajj.
Yeah.
You know the men, they have like one arm showing, yeah, in Hajj. Do you know why?
No.
The reason why, the Prophet told the people, go around that, and by the way, this is a refutation to those who refute me, yeah, because there's some Muslims they're trying to. He said, go to Mecca, which is enemy territory, and go around the Kaaba 7 times. The first 3 times you're going to do it fast and show them your arms.
Yeah.
You know why show them your arms?
Why?
So they know you've still got muscle mass. They know you've got the arms. You know you've got your strength. You're running around. Don't mess with us. You know that's what it. I'm not saying you, obviously. That's it.
Jumbo.
Okay, let me finish. Inshallah. Yeah, no, just 5 minutes.
Yeah. To go for dinner as well.
Yeah, that's all. You can
I
come with
want to say
us.
one.
Yeah. So no, just finish on the point is that the Quran. So if the Art of War, which is a book from Sun Tzu, is not controversial because the purpose of it is giving command to military commanders, then the same thing should be said about the Quran. The only reason why it's controversial in some people's minds is, hold on, isn't this meant for the average layman? Well, you've said yourself quite rightly that the Art of War is also used for the average layman.
Yeah.
The same principles can be applied.
But my final point before I go to dinner is that I think that one of the things that people need to understand is that the increased presence of Islam, whether you call it infringement or presence in British society and British culture, you've got to ask yourself the question: how did we get to a point? And I'm not saying it's negative. How did we get to a point whereby Islam was so present in British culture? Did it have anything to do with our involvement in the Middle East in near-term history, the breakup of the Ottoman Empire after the First World War, the confiscation of oil assets and resource assets in the Middle East by British, Dutch and US companies, and to what extent are we seeing the repercussions of that now? And so for us to turn around and say, oh, well, it's an infringement, you've got to say, well, let's look at the historical behaviour of the British and the Americans and Europeans, and how did we get to this point? Because you can set it out fairly clearly.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's a really good point you made.
People will probably call me some kind of an apologist.
No, you're not.
I'm a realist.
No, I don't. I think we've been quite honest here. I don't think today I've been trying to hide anything. I'm giving you all the verse of the Quran. We talk about death and killing. Look,
I'm not trying to be defensive and say, oh, you're.
I think we're both working together. But let me tell you something here, which I think you're absolutely right. I think what's highly ironic, in my opinion, right, is that look, you've got 2 wars, world wars. So my perspective, they've had the most transformative economic, social and political effect on world history, which are the 2 world wars. Now, the post-World War I environment is completely different to the post-World War, the pre-World War I environment. Completely. Like, it was completely unapologetic. It was completely normal for any of the almost all of the European empires to proclaim an expansionist policy, right? That's one. After World War I, after the mass casualties and deaths and stuff, I said, look, let's not do this no more.
We couldn't afford to do it. It wasn't a case of morality. We suddenly came to our senses and said, we're not going to have a colony anymore.
It was just economically
it was inviable for us.
It was just like slavery, by the way. A lot of people think slavery ended because actually, some English people came and said, let's put our hands. No, the reason why slavery ended, same reason, it's economic. Now, World War II.
But when you talk about slavery, one of the things about slavery as well, it's the point that I always try and make, is that when people talk about slavery, they talk about slavery being a white problem. They don't actually identify with the Portuguese turning up in the Congo in 1450 and it being a common practice in the interior of Africa and them adopting it. And so I know that we were involved in the industrialization or the commercialization of slavery and the end of it, but the beginning of it was it's a humanitarian problem.
I take that point. You're right. I accept that. And also World War II. World War II, as you say, after World War II, I mean, we talk about mass casualties, once again, astronomical level, whatever you would say, So once that's happened now, Western ex-empires decide to bring in their colony members, right, to build the country. So you have, the Windrush, you have 1960s Jamaicans coming in, the Indians coming in, and then in the 80s, you have the Indians.
It's the Commonwealth.
The Commonwealth. So they come in, build the country. Look at, the World Cup is happening now, isn't it? Yes. France. How many black players are in France? Let me ask you a question. How many black players is it 8 out of 11? Is it 8?
Yeah,
So if it's 8 out of 11, I just wonder.
Well, the colonies that they had what, Guinea, Sierra Leone. You know, they were
Yeah,
very active.
no,
And
I'm
one of
just
the things about the
wondering.
French-
Yeah.
So in the 1950s, when the British, gave independence, to a lot of their colonies in sub-Saharan Africa, the French tried to cling on, and I think it was Africanique economics or something. There's a word for it. I was reading about it. They clung on to their colonies. They didn't want to give anything back, and so they were involved in the running. Effectively, you had a president or a head of state that was, a native, and then you had a civil servant, effectively, who was pulling the strings. Who was still involved in the French. So the French went on with their colonies all the way into like the 80s, arguably the 90s.
I was going to say about the colonies, because I was just wondering, there's alternative right or ultra right people that may have a problem with immigration in France, for instance. Yeah, when a black player scores for France, do they cheer or not?
They're happy as Larry.
And if they do cheer, that's a contradiction, isn't it? Because
I
you're
don't know enough about football, but who was the Muslim football player? Was it Salah? Mohamed Salah?
Salah, yeah, that's Liverpool, but
Yeah, I know, but what was everybody doing? I'm sure there were people that were screaming and shouting his name who also talk about the infringement of Islam and British culture.
So to wrap up,
Sure.
I was going to say, I know you need to go to dinner. To wrap up, the point is, when we talk about these issues, there are many nuances that Western consumers and Western academics are not aware of. They're too concerned, just like I would say the literalists. There's a group of people called,
Let me just change.
There's a group called the literalists. They're very concerned, right? Shall I pause my speech?
Yeah. I don't know when it went off, man. I don't have to. I'm finished.
No, I'm just going to finish off. Wrap it up. Just give me a second. Sure. No, let's wrap it up. I came or something. I have to go. I have to bring them back home. So my brother came. Let me just. So they look at verses of the Quran and say, okay, well, this is what Muslims must believe because it says this in the Quran. First and foremost, there's something called istiqra. You have to look at the Quran. You look at the Hadith, the usul. There's three things you got, and then you got to look at the history, the precedent, all these things. Then make a decision. They are not qualified or equipped to deal with that. What we're saying is we're willing to help them on this.
Yeah.
Because if we work together on this, even though they're, for example, anti-Muslim, if we do work together on this, I believe we can come to real solid conclusions that doesn't allow anyone to compromise on their principles. I don't need to compromise. I don't need to apologize. I don't need to change my views, and I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. I'll tell, just like I have been today. I'll be completely candid. But at the same time, you've got to understand exactly where we're coming. You can't just dismiss those things which are in line. For example, with Western values, you can't just, because they happen to be.
But this is and I'll close on this because I really do have to go. But with Western, again, if you take an individual like Jordan Peterson, so Jordan Peterson, who came to fame by talking about gender neutrality in the terms that he wouldn't be forced to use. He wouldn't have them forced upon him because he has a set of beliefs. He will coexist. If somebody says, can you call me this? He said, yes, I will do it, but I won't be forced to do it. And that's effectively what you're saying, is that we need to coexist. However, I won't be forced to believe in what you believe, but you can believe whatever you believe, and I won't force you to believe what I believe.
And that's why he needs to have these discussions with us. He's never done it, and I think that, the closest thing he's ever spoken to a Muslim that I've seen is Majid Nawaz, which is not traditionalist Muslim. Akhi. Oh, he's left. He didn't see you. So that's what I'm saying. So, anyways, it's been a pleasure talking to you, man. Thank you, man. Next time we'll talk about the veganism, because I'm thinking of going vegan for 2-3 weeks to cleanse my system.
I've got a question for you. You had a discussion with. Sorry. You talked about the transcendental entity which endows the rationality.
I'm going to shoot, man. I'm going for dinner.
Or the